Operation Wandering Soul in Vietnam. PSYOPs at its finest. Let's see how effective it was. Let's go.
Within the Hao Nica province in South Vietnam. Suddenly, funeral music and shrill whines are heard, blasting from the U.S. Army's fire support base Chamberlain. A mournful male voice is heard exclaiming in Vietnamese, quote, "My friends, I come back to let you know that I am dead. I am dead. I am in hell. Just hell."
So what they're trying to do is play off the cultural, religious elements of the Vietnamese, right? So if you look up any information about Buddhism, which is a large religion in Vietnam, you would find out that, you know, being trapped in hell or being lost or not buried, there's all sorts of different things. That's what the American government is trying to do with these PSYOPs. Let's keep going.
Of course, these weren't really the sounds of a Vietnamese soldier moaning from the beyond. However, it was meant to pass as such. The audio was fabricated by U.S. forces as part of a psychological warfare strategy called Operation Wandering Soul. The objective was to terrorize the enemies and force them to flee from their position. Some American soldiers agree it's likely the Viet Cong saw right through the ruse. However, it still managed to demoralize and terrify not only the enemy, but also U.S. forces.
Yeah, I don't see how that's going to be effective. I don't know what kind of speaker you'd need. And if you flew over a helicopter, you're going to hear it. You know, it just doesn't seem like it's going to be enough broadcast ability to matter, right? They're going to know, okay, I didn't hear this before. I've been here a long time. And all of a sudden the Americans come in to Vietnam, really kick it off in 1965, 66. I grew up here. I never heard this wacky noise.
Wandering Soul is one fascinating example of the psychological operations the U.S. implemented during the Vietnam War. In Vietnamese tradition, it's believed that the dead must be buried in their homeland. Otherwise, the person will wander the earth aimlessly and in pain. Currently, Wandering Souls Day, known in Vietnam as Vu Lan Day, is one of the most important celebrations in the country. Locals present offerings to their beloved departed, whose spirits visit the homes on the 15th of every month. Those sinful souls trapped in hell can be saved by prayer. Decades after the Vietnam War, families of Viet Cong soldiers fallen in combat kept looking for their loved ones to give them a proper burial.
Now, how effective do you think this really would be? So you're going to have to broadcast this thing. The terrain varies a lot in Vietnam. Could be swampy, mangroves, mountains, beach. Just doesn't seem like the tech was good enough. And they're kind of going to know. If they hear from a helicopter, they get it. The speaker system's only going to go so far. So what's the real effectiveness of this going to be? I think people were smoking too much of the ganja or something who came up with this idea. I just don't see it being effective, but let's keep watching.
According to a piece written by Mark McDonald for the Mercury News Vietnam Bureau, mothers grieved over their sons' lost souls, whose bones hadn't been cleaned and reburied as tradition dictates. The Vietnamese government estimates that over 300,000 of its soldiers remain unaccounted for. In his elegy, A Call to Wandering Souls, poet Win Du wrote, quote, "Strangers have buried you in careless haste. No loved ones near, no friend, no proper rites, and under the wan moon, no kindly smoke of incense wreaths for you." Amid the war, the United States forces started paying attention to this concept of the wandering souls.
Yeah, I can see it being useful to a degree in a very urban area. But in a rural area, like most of the battle was in Vietnam, dense rainforest, hills, mountains, it's going to be very hard to project the sound. And again, they're not going to know it's us. Can't really find much about this to say how effective it was. Let's keep watching.
First, American propagandists released a series of radio broadcasts and wrapped leaflets over North Vietnam. The flyers read, quote, "Comrades, demand that the Communist Party stop its war of aggression in the South, so that no more innocent souls have to join the already great number of innocent souls now wandering in this war-torn country of the South." Then, in 1970, the top-secret U.S. military psychological program thought of using the wandering soul concept to torment Viet Cong soldiers. The plot was to record a series of eerie sounds and voices coming from supposed fallen soldiers.
Figured out these guys have been fighting since the 50s with the French. After World War II, the French came back to colonize Vietnam. And all of a sudden, the French leave. We decide to come in to stop communism. So these people aren't new to this rodeo. You're broadcasting something of radio signals, for one. How many of them have the radio? Number two, if you're broadcasting over a loudspeaker, how effective is that really going to be?
The tapes would be played to taunt and create a series of turmoil in the enemies, forcing them to flee their position. Operation Codename Wandering Soul was organized by the U.S. Army's 6th Psychological Operations Battalion in cooperation with the U.S. Navy. Psychological operations were conducted widely during the Vietnam War. According to Time magazine, over 3 million leaflets were dropped every day, containing safe conduct passes and maps showing the way out of communist territory. As General William Westmoreland said, quote, "Psychological warfare and civic action are the very essence of the counterinsurgency campaign here in Vietnam. You cannot win this war by military means alone."
Yeah, the psychological warfare element has been around a long time. Look at Operation Fortitude. Some of the things that were done there, you got information, disinformation. But this one seems awfully weak because these people, they're fighting for their country where you came in to try to implement or impose your force. So I really don't know how effective this even could have been on paper when they sat down and talked about it.
However, the effectiveness of such operations remains unclear. Engineers gathered for weeks in Saigon studio to record the tapes. South Vietnamese voice actors were hired to play the ghost soldiers and did the recordings in an echo chamber. In the tapes, a young girl is heard calling to her father. A man answers her call, saying, quote, "Who is that? Who is calling me? Oh, my daughter, my wife. Daddy is back home with you, my daughter. I am back home with you, my wife. But my body is gone. I am dead, my family." The voice goes on to say that it's suffering in hell, trapped there after a sense.
I can't imagine. Let's just put our into perspective American troops. If they did this to the American troops while they're in Vietnam, so they're away from home, and they said, "Your mother's dying. We can get you back if you sign this document." I just don't know how effective that would be from my standpoint as an American troop at one point. That I would go, I know what they're doing. It's pretty obvious. I don't know how they thought this was going to work out, but for you guys that are in the know on war history, comment on that. And also put in the comments if you know of other psyops that were effective, that we know about.
Death, quote, "How senseless, senseless. But when I realized the truth, it was too late, too late. Friends, while you are still alive, there is still a chance you'll be reunited with your loved ones. Do you hear what I say? Go home. Go home, my friends." Another tape had 20 seconds of women and children crying. An announcer was then heard explaining that they were the sad cries of families whose sons had died senselessly for communism.
Now, they've tried that in some of these interrogation camps, right? Crying babies, rock music, but they're confined. So they're stuck having to listen to it, even over the airwaves, because they know it's coming from someone else. Also, in the jungles with speakers they tried, and helicopters. It doesn't seem like it's going to travel far enough to do anything. And they're not going to go, okay, this is the Americans playing games.
The cries would then turn to laughter. The announcer would urge the soldiers not to ignore the sounds of their children playing, quote, "Why don't you return at once to rejoin your family? They're waiting for you." One of the audio tapes was named No Doze, a joke meant to imply that no Viet Cong soldier would be able to sleep while listening to it. That recording contained a child saying to his mother, quote, "You miss Daddy. I miss Daddy too. Why doesn't he come back? He must not miss you and me. He surely left us, Mother." The recordings also included Buddhist funeral music and shrill sounds, such as moans and wails. The U.S. forces intended the Viet Cong to believe the sounds were coming from fallen soldiers, urging their comrades to defect and abandon the war.
I mean, even if it was, these people were committed to the cause. They've been fighting colonization or colonizing forces, the French, now us. No matter what we thought we were doing, they were fighting for their country. They've been doing it a long time. Just really have a hard time seeing how this tactic was ever thought to work. Now, I guess if they've got 100 people to do it, was it worth it? Let's see if they got any facts or figures here.
Even if the soldiers saw through the ruse, the U.S. hoped that they'd at least be demoralized and afraid of becoming a wandering soul themselves. Vietnam veteran Chad Spar was there when the tapes were played. During night ambush patrols, the battalion would set up small speakers in trees near where the enemy troops were located. Then they'd play the tape for hours, to no reaction other than random shooting.
I mean, if you know where the troops are located, why do you call it an airstrike? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So if you have to get close enough with these speakers so the troops to hear it, so that means you know where they're at, maybe attack them, maybe skip the whole music PSYOP program.
Later on, they'd capture enemy soldiers, who would admit to hearing the recording and feeling frightened by it. Spar claimed that the recordings terrorized not only soldiers, but the villagers, too. He said, quote, "They couldn't understand the technical side, and being very superstitious to begin with, they believed the message of the tape." The recordings would also be played on loudspeakers mounted on Army helicopters. Squadrons with the mission of dropping small Republic of Vietnam flags.
Now, helicopters are loud. You better have one hell of a loud microphone and speaker system, I should say, to get this from way above. Let's say they flew low, likely to get shot down. So they fly high, helicopters loud. This seems like the most nonsensical thing we've done, at least in the PSYOP world that I've seen, that people are willing to admit. I'm sure there's been some real shitty ones that have taken place in the current era. We won't find out for another 20 or 30 years, I'm sure.
Surrender pamphlets would play the tapes while flying over known enemy-controlled areas. This proved challenging for the pilots, since the loudspeakers would block the door gunners responsible for returning fire. The squadrons knew that they'd take enemy fire every time they played the tapes, so the helicopter with the loudspeakers would be escorted by a gunship, ready to attack at the first sign of the Viet Cong. It was probably very effective since it gave me the creeps, and I was the one causing it.
I just don't know if you could hear it. I mean, this is stock footage, I'm sure. If you flew low enough for them to hear it, you might get shot down. If you fly very high, you have to have some hell of a speaker system like at a stadium. And if you knew where they're at, just bomb them. Why would you wait?
Captain Blaine Rivas, commander of the 29th PSYOP Detachment, said that helicopters playing the Wandering Soul tapes inspired the famous scene in the film Apocalypse Now, as helicopters blast the classical Wagner piece Ride of the Valkyries. An anonymous captain of the North Vietnamese Army confessed to the BBC that soldiers were deeply affected by the campaign. After hearing the recording for nights on end, the soldiers felt desolated and nostalgic.
Now, if you did hear it for nights on end, so you were in one position and the speaker system was set up close enough where you could hear it, okay, that may affect you, but I don't know why you wouldn't move, or the Americans in this case wouldn't just call in an airstrike on your position and be done. I don't know what the benefit of this was. Having a hard time with it. One of you guys sent it, so I'm going to go through it.
However, these feelings only motivated them to keep on fighting. The strategy was received with skepticism by the rest of the U.S. Army. Rick Hoffman, a member of the 6th Psychological Operations Battalion, said to the BBC, quote, "They didn't understand what we were doing. They saw us as some kind of magic show." According to some sources, the operation also provoked some unintended consequences. U.S. soldiers discovered that terrified farm workers refused to work near the fields where the tapes were broadcasted. Allied villagers and militia soldiers were also scared by the recordings.
So the South Vietnamese, who were our allies, had to be near this damn speaker. They probably didn't like it. They can't get away from it. If you were trapped in a room, Abu Ghraib, you need to listen to this for days on end. Anything would make you crazy. I don't care if it's moans and groans from a child or your wife wanting you back or Frank Sinatra. That would make you nuts after days on end.
Refused to engage the Viet Cong for fear of the anguished wandering souls. 2 weeks after the first broadcast, the Viet Cong had a stronger reaction. As soon as the battalion played the tape, they received accurate enemy fire. It seemed the broadcast was helping the soldiers aim directly at the U.S. forces.
Yeah, exactly. So you got this loudspeaker coming up, whether it's on a helicopter or in the jungle. They're going to go, oh, they're over there. Because realizing we don't have Wi-Fi at this point. And so unless it's coming through some sort of radio transmission, they're going to be able to track it down. It's not like it is today where you could just beam the signal via satellite or some other mechanism. They're going to know exactly your position.
It also motivated the enemies to start firing more heavily to drive the evil spirits away. Vietnam veterans told Sergeant Major Friedman that the recordings had also petrified American soldiers. One of them recalled, quote, "It kept me awake and scared the hell out of me." The U.S. battalion was also forbidden from playing the tapes within earshot of the South Vietnamese forces, since they were very susceptible to the content.
Now, how would you manage that one? And this gets into warfare and the complexities of it. So you can't play it near your allies, but you're supposed to play it near the enemy. So if your allies are with you, I guess they have to leave. I mean, the whole thing gets more complicated.
The extent of the campaign's success isn't clear. However, psychological warfare tactics like Operation Wandering Soul were used on multiple occasions both before and after the mission. For example, in the early 1950s, the U.S. military planned to spread rumors amongst the indigenous Marxist guerrillas in the Philippines about a supernatural creature called Hukbulahap. Later, U.S.
Sounds familiar. The Giant of Kandahar, the Loch Ness Monster. Bigfoot, right? Everyone's got their superstitions. And I think that can be effective, but how effective is it really against the troops not fighting your enemy? I don't suspect it is. Otherwise, we'd use it all the time. Now, in the interrogation situation, completely different because you're confined.
Used audio recordings again, this time in the form of heavy metal music, to force strongman General Manuel Noriega out of hiding in 1997 during the U.S. invasion of Panama.
Now, I remember that in the 80s. Did it have the tanks around him playing heavy metal music? Did it make him quit? Did it make him give up? I doubt it. They probably cut his power and his water. That's probably what did it. Would it be annoying? Sure. Could you put earplugs in? Probably.
Aside from the terrifying recordings, the U.S. dropped leaflets reproducing a letter from an American to a North Vietnamese commanding general. In it, the American general says that the enemy army lost in an embarrassing battle, but that his soldiers had still buried the dead and taken the wounded to safety. Captain Edward N. Volk, the 6th Psychological Operations Battalion staff officer, said that this friendly letter led the North Vietnamese battalion and regiment commanders to be more likely to surrender. According to Volk, quote, "This was by far the best psychological operations leaflet I ever saw by a U.S. combat unit."
These guys are drinking their own Kool-Aid. No one can really tell how effective it was. They like it. They think it'll work. They're underestimating their enemy. And that's what happens in a lot of battles. You kind of get this groupthink. Everybody plays along, the yes men, and no one says, this is a shitty idea, boss. So what's your opinion on PSYOPs? Do you think Wandering Soul concept was effective? There is no proof. The government's never going to say it was terribly ineffective, right? However, in an interrogation scenario, if you guys have heard a song and it gets stuck in your head, it can make you crazy. I think that's where it can be effective.